back to I have enough to say on a topic that I'm going to make a whole video about it. Today we'll be discussing non-binary characters, specifically in fantasy works, specifically in the Shadowhunter Chronicles and the Grishaverse. Spoilers disclaimer, I will be talking about Anna Lightwood and Hanne Brum in this, so there will be spoilers for the Nikolai duology, that's King of Scars and Rule of Wolves, and there will be spoilers for the Last Hours series and Anna Lightwood's short story in Ghost of the Shadow Market, I forget what it's called. Representation in fantasy is a complicated and well-discussed topic because it is something that should just be fundamentally so easy. You are creating, with a fantasy novel, an entire world. You are creating reality from scratch. And therefore, if you don't want to write about issues like misogyny or racism or homophobia, your world can just not have them. If you want to dive into those topics, go ahead. But it is literally so easy to write diverse characters and not have to cover those topics, although obviously they should be talked about, and not have to cover those topics in a fantasy novel. However, when it comes to trans characters, it is so rare that they are actually included in pieces of media. Even with authors like Cassandra Clare and Leigh Bardugo, who are heralded as, these champions of the LGBTQ community when it comes to representation in their books, they focus on the LGB part and don't include trans characters. Now, I will say Cassandra Clare does have one wonderfully written trans character in the Dark Artifices series, Diana Rayburn, and so props to her for that, A+. But when it comes to non-binary characters, there is so much that is needed. Now, the reason I want to talk about Anna Lightwood and Hanne Brum specifically is because these characters are never stated to be trans. Their gender identity is not really talked about, except for that it is. They are coded to be non-binary, they have all the ingredients without the label. Hanne Brum could also be just a trans man. It's never explicitly stated. So we don't know. Even though all of the coding is there is no confirmation. And I can already hear people saying, oh, well, it's just all in your head, you're just finding gay characters where there aren't any. I have 2 quotes to prove it. Anna Lightwood says in Every Exquisite Thing, the Ghost of the Shadow Market short story that she is in, quote, "I do not have to be only one thing," Anna thought. "I can choose what suits me when it suits me. The trousers and jacket do not make me a man, and the necklace does not make me a woman. They are only what makes me feel beautiful and powerful in this moment. I am exactly as I choose to be. I am a Shadowhunter who wears gorgeous suits and a legendary pendant." That quote is referring to just her gender expression, because The Last Hours is set in the early 20th century, 1908? I don't remember. I read it a little while ago. But, so she is described constantly as masculine. She wears men's clothes. She lives on her own, which is, not really something a lot of women of her age were doing. She is constantly coded in a masculine direction. She is lesbian and she dates tons of women, and there are constant points where she's mistaken for a man by strangers, and even in her beginning description by our main character Cordelia, she is described as being masculine. And in this quote, she says explicitly that she is not a man, nor is she a woman. And that what she wears doesn't change that. Now, yes, that is literally the definition of being non-binary. And for Anna Lightwood, it's so easy to just say that. It's so easy to just come out and confirm that in the books, and to have her have an honest conversation about it with someone, because she has tons of people she could talk about this stuff with. Rather than just sort of throwing bits and pieces in here and not actually giving us any confirmation. Now, I can also already hear people being like, oh, well, it's historical, the classic "there weren't gay people in the past," which is wrong, very obviously inaccurate. And their gender nonconforming people were at the forefront of the queer movement from the very, very beginning. We've always existed. Like, it's always been a thing. The Last Hour series is chock full of queer characters. We have, like, tons of them. And so many queer relationships, and yet we can't do the simple act of having Anna Lightwood actually talk about her gender identity, which is really frustrating, because it is something that Cassandra Clare obviously cares about representation. She's talked about it constantly. She, is Magnus and Alec were like the pinnacle of queer representation in like late 2000s YA media, but so just go the next step. And I understand if she doesn't have Anna Lightwood like use neutral pronouns or, talk to some other like strangers about it or whatever, because I understand that it doesn't have to be like a big deal, or even like you can still make it historically accurate while still letting Anna Lightwood identify the way she so clearly does. And especially in a fantasy world like Shadowhunters, like in the Infernal Devices series, it is talked so often about how Shadowhunters don't follow like traditional like Victorian manners and like rules and stuff. They call each other by their first names. Like so many stuff like that is talked about constantly. And Anna's parents have already expressed like they're proud of her for like dressing like, they don't mind that she dresses like in men's clothing, and they don't mind that she dates women. Like, it's, if all that is fine, let's just go the next step and make it all fine. It frustrates me to see when representation is just nearly there, but not quite. And that brings me to Hanne Brum. Now, Hanne is very, very similar to Anna Lightwood in a lot of aspects. She's in a relationship with a woman. It's super slow burn. But she is in a relationship with Nina. And there is all of the coding for being a trans character is there. I'd say she probably does lean a little bit more towards being like trans masc than just like non-binary and androgynous, but let me read you my library copy of Rule of Wolves here. Do you know the only time I felt beautiful? Hanne asks, and then she goes on to say, when I tailored myself to look like a soldier, when we cut off all my hair. And Nina says, but you didn't look like you. And Hanne says, but I did, for the first time, the only time. And she moves on to discuss how, because she's like a Heartbender, she's a Grisha, she can grow her own hair. So if she wanted, her hair is currently short, so if she wanted to grow her hair, she could, but she says, quote, I like it the way that it is. So she expresses, also another point, I don't have the quote for it, but she expresses another point that she wishes that she was a boy. And part of that is because of the misogynist culture she lives in, part of that is just wanting to have the freedoms that a man would have, but she doesn't necessarily want to give up being a woman altogether. That's just the full-on description of being non-binary. Like, that, I feel like that connects to a lot of non-binary people's experiences. And it would be so easy in this fantasy world that does not pertain to our reality whatsoever, like the Shadowhunter Chronicles does. It is so easy to just have her be non-binary, or to be trans. Like, just to go that next extra step and have it be confirmed. Like, if you're going to go so far as to code your characters as non-binary, take that next step and say that they are non-binary. Like, it's so frustrating to see authors be just almost there, but not quite. It's like, if you're going to give us all the ingredients, just go ahead and bake us the cake. It's that simple. And it feels like queer baiting to see them have all the qualities of a trans person, but then not actually followed through. It feels very like, oh, well, I'll give like just enough that it looks queer, but not really go through with it, which is something that a lot of like authors and creators of movies and TV shows profit from without actually giving concrete representation, which is, I could talk about that for an hour or two, but in the end, it's bad, and it is harmful. So I hate to see two great authors that clearly care about the LGBTQ communities doing that. There's literally no excuse for not including representation in your books. And while these two authors do really well at providing representation in a lot of other areas, taking this next step would just mean so much for all the people, for all the trans and queer people reading their books. And it is frustrating to see them be so close to the finish line and then not cross it at all. In summary, for authors to write their characters as non-binary or trans and then not follow through with it is frustrating. When all the pieces are there, just put them together and you can have honest, in-depth, really interesting conversations about gender that will only heighten your books. And so this is my selling point to you, Cassandra Clare and Leigh Bardugo. You have time. You write, especially with Cassandra Clare, like Anna Lightwood has another book coming out. Give us the conversations on gender that are so important. Yeah, it's not that hard.